door in the middle will make an independent space. By the window, create a mini kitchen with cabinets. Include a built-in washer and dryer so he can wear clothes right after washing. Embed a small refrigerator on the other side and extend the side cabinet. Cut a hole in the countertop for a small sink where Little John can wash veggies in his face. Above, install a wall cabinet that doubles as a magic mirror. Install a folding door to keep out oil fumes. Next, weld several galvanized square steel pipes and hang them up. Shamelessly ask his aunt for some expansion screws to fasten them firmly to the wall. Cover it with eco-friendly wood veneer, built to last. Then head to his cousin's house to borrow a soft mattress for the bed. Window seat blocks add more security, and it's cozier to sleep with a soft bag against the wall. Dig a hole in the wall and add several wooden boards for wall hanging and a switch socket mounting head. No worries if Little John wets the bed. It can also be a storage window. Make a clothes rail to hang his clothes casually, making them easy to grab. Install a projector on top so Little John can happily learn dance moves in bed without bumping his head. Create a wall cabinet to store all his work information. Add a folding board to serve as his study area, which doesn't take up space when put away. Install a hemp rope ladder next to it, making it easy for Little John to go downstairs while also strengthening his physical fitness. It's discreet when put away and includes a rest area. This
There we go. I'm here on time and I forgot to turn my mic on. There we go. Hello, welcome back to Sequel Summer. This is gonna be... I'm gonna go on a bit of a ramble in this one. Much like everything for Sequel Summer, there will be spoilers for book 1, and all of the books that I'm covering, I have covered the first books before, so if you don't want the spoilers, go watch my recommendations of the first books. If you don't mind, welcome, and I hope you enjoy it. We are doing Wolfstar, which, when I was doing research for cover artists, which I was unsuccessful at, I found many covers that were similar to the ones I found for Wolf Tower, but I couldn't find the artists. Again, man, don't type Wolfstar book and do an image search, because what you won't get is the Tanith Lee novel. So, surprise, we're doing Wolfstar by Tanith Lee. I will say that there are a couple of things that, sorry, I have to turn that down. That is very loud in my ears. There are a couple of things that just are... I've discovered while reading this that I have opinions about some things. Like I always knew I had some, but there are some very specific ones. I will say, once again, finding covers was easy, but I couldn't find the illustrators, and like I said last time, I've stopped putting up covers if I can't find at least the name of the illustrator, so that's how this is going. When we get to that page, you'll see I just have the cover of the book I read. So, you ready to get started? Get into this. As per usual, this is meant to entertain and inform. I do not hold any of the rights to the works described, and I hope you all enjoy. And then we move our mouse over here and pretend that y'all don't see it. So, Wolfstar by Tanith. Much like the other one, it was originally published in the UK under Hodder's Children's Books in 2000. It is part of a series, hence why it's part of Sequel Summer. And that series is the Claudie Journals. This is book 2. So all of this is very basic, very familiar. A lot of these first few slides are basically repeats. So, other cover. This is where we get into I couldn't find information. This is the cover that I read. It's the 2002 Puffin cover by the cover artist Victor Lee. I will say there are 2 variants of this cover, and I think I like the other one better, but big old asterisk. If you're buying this series with this cover and it's got the badge around the name, which is the other variant of this cover, is there's like a purple or a gold or a green. I don't remember what the other color badge is. 3 of those badges are at the top, like this one, and 1 of them is at the bottom. Because we can't have nice things, and we can't have the titles of the books all in the same spot to make it look pretty. So that's a thing to be aware of, although if all you're looking at is spines, it shouldn't come up. About the author, it's Tanith Lee. She's won multiple Nebula and World Fantasy Awards, has written over 90 novels and 300 short stories. Christ's sister has read her Unicorns books and enjoyed them, and I'm pretty sure that Tanith Lee is the one who wrote about the ships, and I will admit, these are the books of hers I've read. I've read the Claudie Journals, and I enjoy them, and they are very much children's books. And I found it very strange. So when I put these slideshows together, I do a little bit of digging around to find the information I need, because there isn't really one place that has all of it. So I'm going to various places and looking around. And so I typically see reviews for the books. And since I've already read them, that's not a problem. The reviews for this book, there were 3 different kinds of reviews for this book. The first one was where they just summarized the entire book and didn't give an opinion. And I was very confused by that one. The second kind of review was, I loved it, it was just like the first book. And the third review is, this was such a boring and confusing YA novel. And my problem with that take, and maybe I should get to this later, but I'm going to talk about it now. My problem with the take of Wolfstar is a boring and confusing YA novel is I'm fairly certain it's not a YA novel. Oh no. So I'm not sure why that comes up in the reviews so often, because it's not a YA novel. Like, yes, Claudie's a teenager, but it's not written like a YA novel. It doesn't vibe like a YA novel, and it doesn't vibe like an old YA. So, for the record, older YA novels go one of 2 ways. Either they are just like children's novels and fancy dresses, or they're adult novels about slightly younger characters, is basically how old YA novels go. This is written like a middle grade fiction, which is that narrow space right before YA. Where where they technically have more children aesthetic than YA aesthetic, and that's what this is. So older character, but younger feel. So yeah. So what do you need to know about Wolfstar? It is in a journal style. It features a flawed main character. It is a fantasy science fantasy, and I will get into my definition of that versus like the Wikipedia definition of that. And then it's an easy read. It absolutely is an easy read. Our main character, welcome back, Claudie. It's a journal. Notably, it is the same journal she was writing in last time. So once again, a former lady's maid servant in the house in the desert who went to here's your spoiler warning if you haven't read Wolf Tower, who went on an adventure to go back to the city, which is where Wolf Tower is. Met a bunch of people, had some growing pains, went to the city and kind of ruined life for everybody else there, but that's fine because that particular city was basically a dystopia. And it ended with her running away with her lover. So, everybody on the same page. This book starts immediately after that. Well, it starts a couple of months after that, but she recaps what happens in those months. So it is a journal style. It is still set in a chapter format rather than dated, so if you don't like your journals without dates, I'm very sorry. There are some fairly clear hard breaks. There's always like squiggly lines, or if it's a shorter break, there's no squiggly lines, but there's like parentheses. There are more time skips in this book, and there's a lot more of Claudie directly addressing her reader. Part of that is as a plot point that takes place around the middle of the book, so I'm not going to get into that too much, but there is a reason that she more directly addresses the reader. As I said, this one doesn't... It is journal style, it is very much, she is telling the story to you, the reader. But unlike a lot of journal style things, it's just, I find it way more enjoyable. Flawed main character. So Claudie is a great many things. I think she's a delight. But perfect is not one of them. And importantly for this slide, she isn't perfect externally or internally. And by that I mean she isn't going, oh, I'm not pretty, I'm just the worst, while the world is going, oh, you're gorgeous. No. Claudie has flaws. She's got a bit of a temper. She can go into hysterics at times. She freezes up. She gets sulky. She's a survivor. So sometimes she will do things that will ensure her survival, but like she isn't happy with herself for doing them and will get angry about it. And the flaws are written as flaws, not features. I will say that my book recommendations in a little bit, I did choose this as one of my themes for that. I will say that my darling Dritz Jordan is not on the list because he is a Mary Sue and I love him dearly, but his flaws are not written as flaws, they're written as features. and he's like, I have these flaws, and it's like, cool, you're also coasting, and everyone around you knows that you're amazing and wonderful and awesome and coasting, and they all think you're the greatest thing since, like, magic. So, as much as I love him, and as much as I love the Icewind Dale trilogy, no, that's not a flawed main character. The other thing is, people like people, look, I don't just want to bash on things, but like people like Bella in Twilight, and as someone who enjoyed Twilight, yeah, her internal thing had said she had flaws, but externally everyone thought she was amazing. And like she didn't act like they were flaws. So like cognitive dissonance for the reader. But no, in this case, Claudia has flaws and knows it. She acknowledges it. So, fantasy, science, fantasy. It's like science fiction, but in a fantasy setting. And, so... the internet will tell you things like Dune and Star Trek are science fantasy, which is weird in my little brain. And they're like, because you can learn the magic system or whatever the fantastical element is, then it's science fantasy and not just science fiction. My thing is that science fiction has always had a heavy emphasis on the science part. Versus science fantasy, which has always just been kind of space-flavored fantasy. So, Star Wars versus Star Trek. It's a space-flavored fantasy book. Movie. Both. So, when I say fantasy science fantasy, I'm talking about a fantasy setting where the science is important, but it's fantasy. So how that relates to Wolfstar, and how it relates to by extension Wolf Tower, is there are things that are attributed to magic by certain characters that are then explained to be things like clockwork, or there are kitchens that run off of piping, or there are experiments that are run, some of them kind of awful. There are things in both books that are recognizable to the reader for what they are, even though they might not be recognizable to Claudia or to anyone else in that world. And then there are some like straight up sci-fi things that show up, but the science of it is always important. And then there are some things that are just known to be magic, but maybe they're not magic, and the presence of the very sciencey science kind of leans towards there's an explanation out there somewhere. So that's what I mean by fantasy science fantasy. It's explained fairly well. There's experimentation. There's a lot of oops learning, mostly by Claudia. And there's a very interesting mix of almost steampunk style technology mixed into just straight up fantasy settings that don't feel like they should work together, but they absolutely do. And finally, it's an easy read. You can read this in a single afternoon. You could read the whole quartet in a single day. It's quick, it's easy. There is a little bit of a caveat in that Wolf Tower is if Wolf Tower is a straight line with a couple of curves, Wolf Star is like a maze on the back of a kid's menu, in that there are a lot of like turns and double backs, but there is very much a beginning and an end. Also, if you do not enjoy reading about people's opinions on travel, the first 100 pages are gonna be rough. Of like a 230 page book. So recommendations for fantasy, science, fantasy. The White Dragon by Anne McCaffrey. If you know anything about Pern, Pern is a fantasy series that, as it goes on, reveals the fact that it is a science fantasy series, and then it keeps going and kind of wraps back around on itself, Ouroboros style, and becomes fantasy, science fantasy again. The White Dragon is not the first book in the series. I would recommend at least reading The Dragon Riders of Pern before you read The White Dragon, but The Dragon Riders of Pern has very little of the science fantasy part of this. So The White Dragon is where that starts really becoming a thing. So You Want to Be a Wizard by Diane Duane takes place in, depending on which version of the book you get, in either the 90s or actually, I don't know when the rewrite is set. Sometime after 2001. Modern New York. It is very much a book where magic is science. So there's a lot of like math and understanding the process and how things work. In a later book, they make a spell to purify the ocean by basically making a ring, and any pollutants that pass through the ring get turned into salt, because a little more salt doesn't hurt the ocean. Is basically how that spell works, but you have to understand like the properties of the ocean and pollution and salt, and like, because you don't want to turn everything that passes through the ring into salt, obviously, because if fish pass through, you don't just want to salt the fish. So there is science involved, but there's also like magic. But So You Want to Be a Wizard is the first book. It is a little lighter on the science by like the slimmest margin, partially because it follows Nita and Kit, and Darien is not yet a major character. Once she is, the science goes hard. And Briar's book, which is the fourth book in a quartet that is ostensibly a strictly fantasy series. However, Briar's book deals with a citywide pandemic. Or I guess it's an epidemic, not a pandemic. It's only the city, but it's an epidemic, and the medical science around that. It is a wonderful, delightful read. It is the final book in a quartet, so again, highly recommend reading the rest of The Circle of Magic before you read Briar's book. But if you just want to pick up a book about magical diseases and the science and all and stopping them, Briar's book is for you. And so, flawed main characters. These are characters who are flawed, and the flaws are treated as flaws, and they're not glossed over, and they have some weight into the story itself. So Percy Jackson and the Olympians, the Lightning Thief, by Rick Riordan. Percy's a mess. Like, he's an adorable mess, but he's a mess. And, like, he knows he's a mess. And even though, like, externally people think he's cool, you also still have characters who know he's a mess. Namely Annabeth and Grover, but there are others. He's a bit of a hothead at times. He wants to do his own thing. During the Olympians, more than his other novels, he's very much trying to prove himself. So he's got flaws, and he's got character growth, and those two things go really well and nicely together. Critical Role Vox Machina, Kith and Kin, which I have covered before. By Mariki Nijkamp. Look, your flawed main characters are Vexalia and Vax'ildan, let's be real. And they're flawed partially because they're player characters in a D&D game, and partially because they're so wrapped up in keeping each other alive and looking out for the other one that they have very unhealthy coping mechanisms. But they are flawed main characters. It very much shows up in the book. Is it a little tropey? Yes. Is it a D&D based novel? Kind of. In the sense that it's from Critical Role. Yes. But there are some twin tropes in there that when I read it, I didn't think of them as twin tropes, and like looking back now, it's like, oh, those are some like hard sibling twin tropes. Got it. Honestly, it was listening to someone else. I had it on in the background, someone talking about Avatar: The Last Airbender, and it made me think of Kith and Kin, and I was like, why? And I'm like, oh, this thing that they're bashing is kind of silly in this is a major plot thing in Kith and Kin. And I'm like, yeah, but they addressed it better and, like, fleshed it out and made it a whole thing as opposed to what Avatar did. Which isn't to say Avatar, like, I enjoy Avatar, so no bashing on Avatar. But there are better episodes and worse episodes. Howl's Moving Castle by Diane Wynne-Jones. Pick your main character. They are all flawed. They are all acknowledged as flawed. The flaws cause character growth for most of them, except sort of Sophie. Sophie has character growth, but it's a much more subtle arc than for, like, Howl, or even Calcifer. And then Coraline by Neil Gaiman, because I don't think I've talked about Neil Gaiman enough lately. Has a very flawed main character. It's Coraline. And her flaws are a problem for her. Like, a couple others off the top of my head would be things like Uglies with Taliwa. And, like, if we're talking about books I've covered, Imposters, which is set in the Uglies universe, has this as well. Has a flawed main character where the flaw is a problem. Like, there is growth needed. And it's not written as a positive, it's written as a flaw. So that is all I have, but I would like to say, can I minimize this? Will you minimize? Thank you. I would like to say that I really like, I like the Claudia journals. I do find it funny, on the back of the one I have, the copy I have, it says, read the final book in the trilogy, and I'm like, this is a quartet. And I know this is a quartet. And this was a quartet when I started reading it. Um, so, yes. If the first 3 books of the Cloudy Journal seem a little tighter than the 4th book, there's a reason for that. I don't normally recommend books that were a certain length at first and then shifted. But I don't not, because technically the Dritz books are that way. The Deed of Paxenarian has a sequel series, which is a little different, but not really. But yeah, looks like in the poll that we will be doing the sequel to Howl's Moving Castle. I will have to... Pretty sure that's the doors, not the castle. I think that's the one it is. House in Many Ways. I'm pretty sure is the first sequel, and then Castle in the Sky? Air? It's one of those. Is the third. But no, we will just be doing the next one in the series, in the trilogy, for Howl's Moving Castle. And I say in the trilogy, but it's kind of like a series, but it's not a tightly woven series. It's a lot of fun though. I did go on a huge rant earlier today about Pern. I adore Pern. I should probably do a Pern book. I am very biased towards Pern, although I'm biased towards a lot of the books I read. Many of these are rereads for me. It's the newer ones. So I have subscribed to a book box. And those are the ones that I haven't read before. But sometimes I read them and I'm like, oh, I didn't like this, like Violet Made of Thorns. But then there are some, like the Luminaries and like Ballad and Dagger and Hotel Magnifique, which I haven't talked about individually, but I have mentioned before, that I really enjoyed, and I like those. But yeah, I should probably do a Pern book at some point. Part of me knows I should start with, Dragonflight. And then part of me is like, oh, or you could start with Dragon Song. And then there's the last part of me that's just like, do the Master Harper. It's your favorite. Do the Master Harper. I have a very soft spot for Master Harper Robinson. To be fair, he was one of the first Harpers that I read about, so... I didn't start with Dragonflight. Oh, excuse me. So, about Pern. The Harpercraft Hall trilogy, which is set in Pern, is kind of geared at a younger audience than the rest of the Pern books are. So I got to read those before I got to read the normal Pern books because I could read them as a kid. So I have a very soft spot for them, and Master Harper Robinson is in those. So he's always been one of my favorites. I don't normally like very political books. So like Dune, not up my alley. But Robinson, even though he's not very political in the Harpercraft Hall series, he is in his own book and in the other books and in like The White Dragon. He's very important. But I already liked him too much to like have that turn me off of liking him. There are a couple of books where they've snuck up on me like that. Paxenarian is another big one where I was just like, ooh, girl with sword. And like the deed of Paxenarian, this sounds amazing. And it is amazing. But oopsie, political intrigue. And then, for the record, read The Deed of Paxenarian by Elizabeth the Moon. But if you like The Deed of Paxenarian, which is the name of the trilogy, go read The Paladin's Legacy, and don't be jump scared by the fact that it's from like 5 different perspectives, and it's all like political intrigue. And I was not prepared for that coming off of Pax, even though Pax has a lot of political intrigue, but it's all filtered through the lens of her. Yeah, the sequel series is different, but I greatly enjoy it. I'm a huge fan. It makes me very happy. I should probably mention that for as confusing as Wolfstar can be, it's not confusing as in... How do I explain this? The Claudie Journal... Well, it's not even the Claudie Journals, because the first one is not confusing at all. It's Wolfstar, and it's the next one, whatever the next one is. Survey says... That doesn't look like the right title. Did the title change? That doesn't look like the right title. Oh, that's... Huh. It's not the right title. So Wolf Queen is also a bit complicated. Interestingly enough, on the back of my copy, it says that the next book is called Queen Wolf. Oh, is Queen Wolf the British one? Hang on. I should have put this in the thing. I didn't. It is called Wolfstar Rises in the UK, not just Wolfstar. But, Wolf... No, let's just do the Claudie Journals. What is it called in... Okay. Okay, that makes sense. So, the back of my book says that the name of the final book in the trilogy is Queen Wolf. The inside says it's Wolf Queen, and the difference is the back of the book is closer to the UK version, which is Queen of the Wolves, and the inside where it says Wolf Queen is literally what the US title is. Okay, and then the fourth one is the same all around. It is the same all around. Where is... I do remember what I don't like about that one. That's okay. Okay. I don't have to like everything. Sorry, the thing where I was looking up what the US and UK titles were had like little synopsises of the characters, and it had the name of one of the characters and like the synopsis next to him, and I'm like, oh, I remember that character. Yeah, that character was awful, and like was supposed to be awful, so well done, but also that character was awful. I have coffee tonight. It's not. So I like coffee, and I like flavored coffee, and I'm a weirdo who likes medium roast coffee, um, which isn't actually weird, but it is at the same time because I acknowledge that I like a weaker roast of coffee than most people claim to like. Anyway, ignoring all of that, I thought I would like this flavor, and it's aight. I can deal with it, but it's not really great. Like I thought like apple pie flavored coffee would be fantastic, and it smells good, but it tastes kind of wonky. Am I a coffee snob? Sort of. I mean, probably. My sister would probably say I am. But I'm more of a, there are things I like and things I don't like, and I will tell you what I like and what I don't like. And what I like is medium roasts. Oh, what was I gonna? So we'll do the Housemoving Castle sequel next time, and then probably the sequel to Mything Persons after that. I have discovered, going through several of the shelves, that somewhere or another I have lost the sequel to Assassin's Apprentice. So that one may get shifted to just being a sequel somewhere. I promise we'll get that one. But yes, I need to find that book so I can start working on it. That is one that's going to probably take me more than a week and a half to read. So I will be reading that and something else at the same time. But like, I used to do that all the time anyway, so that's not a problem. Probably, if I can find it, I could read it and the next book in Mything Persons at the same time, because one of those requires a lot more thought process than the other. In an unrelated note, but it's a little... So, flawed characters and the fact that I've played it recently and I've been listening to the soundtrack for all week. I've been playing Stray Gods, so I've had those tunes in my head, and variations on those tunes in my head. Flawed characters, Stray Gods has them. But that is such a fun game. I desperately wish it wasn't a 6-hour time commitment at a time. Not because it is not an enjoyable 6 hours, but because there are times where I'm like, I need to do this in smaller pieces, but also I don't want to do it in smaller pieces. So that has been my recent time sink. That and I've played a bit of Dave the Diver because it's chill and a vibe, and I'm here for chill and a vibe. Well, I hate to go so early, but it looks like my connection is deciding to start to be a little wild. So before everything decides that it's gonna throw a hissy fit, I will head on out. I will see you in 2 weeks for House of Many Ways. We've already done Howl's Moving Castle. Have a good night.